Step away from her. The nanny is standing in the middle of the Kwan estate foyer. 6-year-old Minjae is pressed against her chest, crying into her shoulder. Her right hand is still trembling, not from the hit, from everything that made the hit necessary. Han Yuan is on the marble floor, hair fanned out around her like something staged. One heel snapped clean off. Her hand is pressed to her cheek. Her eyes are not filled with pain. They are filled with the particular fury of a woman whose plan just made a sound it was never supposed to make. In the doorway stands Kwan Sejin. He reads the room in 4 seconds. His mistress on the floor. His son crying into the shoulder of a woman in a nanny's uniform. His mother at the top of the staircase, hands folded, face giving nothing away. The face of a woman who has been waiting for this exact moment and is not surprised it finally came. The room is completely silent except for Minjae, whose small shoulders shake with every breath. Sejin says it again. Quieter. Final. Step away from her. Han Yuan, still on the floor, still calculating behind her eyes, goes very still. Because the words landed in the wrong direction. They crossed the room and stopped, not at the nanny standing with the child. At her. At the woman on the marble floor who has spent 3 months building a world where she is untouchable. She is not untouchable. The nanny didn't move. Sejin did. 3 months ago, Nadia Osei stepped through the iron gates of the Kwan estate with a carry-on suitcase, a child development degree from Howard University, and her grandmother's voice sitting quietly in the back of her mind like it always did when she was walking into something large. A child knows who is safe, her grandmother had told her once. The summer Nadia was 12 and their neighbor's dog bit the mail carrier, but never once growled at a child. Trust the child before you trust the adults. Nadia had written that down. She still had the notebook. She stood at the gate that first morning and looked up at a building that was too clean, too tall, and too quiet for a house where a 6-year-old boy lived. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace. The kind that comes from people learning not to make noise. She rolled her carry-on across the stone path and told herself what she always told herself before a new placement. Learn the child first. Everything else can wait. She did not know, standing there in her good blazer with her grandmother's voice in her ear, that the child had been waiting too. That he had been waiting longer than she had. She did not know what the house was. Not fully. Not yet. She did not know about Han Yuan. But 3 months later, standing in a marble foyer with a crying boy against her chest and a man in the doorway saying words aimed at the wrong woman, Nadia understood something her grandmother had also told her. That you rarely know what you walked into until you are already standing in the middle of it. She held Minjae tighter. She had walked into the right place. The estate was the kind of place that made you lower your voice without being asked. Nadia noticed it the moment she stepped inside, the way sound seemed to stop at the walls, like the marble floors and high ceilings had made a private agreement to absorb everything. No echo. No bounce. Just a deep, careful quiet that sat in every room like a second piece of furniture nobody talked about. The housekeeper, a small woman named Mrs. Cho, led her through the main hall without looking back. Nadia counted doors. 6 in the east corridor alone. She noted the staff she passed, 3 of them in the first 2 minutes, all moving with a specific kind of focus that meant they had been trained not to be seen. Not hired. Trained. She filed that away. Sejin met her in the study. He was already standing when she walked in, which she appreciated. A man who doesn't make you wait is a man who respects your time, her grandmother used to say. He was tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the wrist. He looked like a man who had already read her file before she sat down. She suspected he had. He shook her hand once, firm, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. He asked 3 questions. What was her approach to a child who refused to eat? What she would do if a child told her something that worried her? What she believed a nanny's actual job was? She answered all 3 without hesitating. He looked at her for a moment after the 3rd answer. Not studying her exactly, more like confirming something he had already decided. Then he said, Minjae is 6. He's quiet. He'll watch you before he trusts you. Don't rush it. He paused. Most people rush it. I won't, Nadia said. He nodded once. The meeting was over. She met Min-jae 20 minutes later. He was in the playroom at the end of the east corridor, a large, bright room full of toys that looked barely touched. Bookshelves along one wall. A low table in the center with colored pencils laid out in a straight, careful line. The kind of order a child creates when the adults around them value it. She didn't see him at first. Then the curtain near the window moved, just slightly, and she saw two dark eyes watching her from behind the white fabric. She didn't call his name. Didn't crouch down with a big smile the way she'd seen other nannies do in videos, performing warmth like it was an audition. She simply walked to the low table, sat down on the floor beside it, and picked up the book she'd brought in her bag, a picture book about a bear who gets lost and finds his way home by following the smell of honey. She opened it and started reading. Quietly, like she was reading to herself. 3 pages in, the curtain shifted again. By page 5, small footsteps crossed the room. By page 7, Kwon Min-jae was sitting beside her on the floor, close enough that his shoulder touched her arm, his eyes moving across the pictures with a focus that told her he was a child who paid attention to details. His father's eyes, yes, but the hunger behind them was entirely his own. She kept reading. She noted this. She noted everything. Min-jae didn't talk much. Nadia noticed this the way she noticed everything quietly, without making it a thing. Most adults, when faced with a quiet child, tried to fix it. They asked too many questions. They filled the silence with noise, as if silence in a child was a problem to be solved rather than a language to be learned. Nadia had seen it 100 times. The child would pull back further, and the adult would try harder, and the whole thing would become a kind of gentle chase that helped nobody. She didn't chase. She watched instead, and what she saw in the first week told her more than any conversation could have. Min-jae flinched when doors opened too fast. Not dramatically, just a small tightening of the shoulders, a fraction of movement that most people would miss entirely. He was silent at mealtimes in the specific way of a child who had learned that drawing attention to himself at the table was not always safe. He ate what was put in front of him without comment. He never asked for more. He never said he didn't like something. He drew constantly. Pencils, markers, the occasional crayon he kept in a tin beside his bed. His pictures were detailed and patient. Houses, trees, animals, rooms. People sometimes. But the people in his drawings stood alone or in pairs, and in every single one, there was no small boy included. He drew the world he saw. He left himself out of it. Nadia sat with that for 2 days before she said anything. On the 3rd morning, while he was drawing at the low table, she sat across from him and slid a blank piece of paper in front of herself. She picked up a pencil and started drawing too. Nothing impressive, a simple house, a tree with uneven branches, a sun in the corner the way children draw it, a circle with lines coming out like a flower. Min-jae looked up, looked at her drawing, looked at her. "The branches are wrong," he said. It was the most words he had said to her in one sentence. "I know," she said. "Draw me how they should look." He hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then he picked up his pencil and drew the most careful, accurate tree branches she had ever seen from a 6-year-old. She studied it seriously. "You're right," she said. "Mine are wrong." Something moved across his face. Small and quick, like light on water. Not quite a smile. The space just before one. They drew together for an hour. He corrected her twice more. She let him. That Sunday, she took him to the park. Sejin's security detail followed at a distance. 2 men, quiet, professional, and Nadia acknowledged them once with a nod, and then paid them no further attention. Her focus was the boy running ahead of her on the path, his small legs working hard, his face turning red with the effort of just being fast and free and unobserved. She sat on a bench and watched him run until he couldn't anymore. He collapsed in the grass, chest heaving, and laughed, sudden and real and a little surprised by itself, like his own body had caught him off guard. She filed that too. The laugh. The surprise of it. Later that week she met Sunhee properly. The grandmother lived in the West Wing in rooms full of warm light and books stacked on every flat surface. Nadia knocked, was told to enter, and found a woman of about 70 sitting upright in an armchair with a cup of tea and the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades deciding exactly how much energy to give each moment. Kwan-sun, he looked at her the way Sejin had, reading, assessing, but where Sejin's gaze was closed and professional, Sunhee's was open and unhurried. She was taking her time. She had earned the right to. The silence between them lasted long enough that a less steady person would have filled it. Nadia held it without blinking. Sunhee's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. She lifted her teacup. "You'll do," she said simply, and turned back to her book. Nadia understood, walking back down the corridor, that she had just passed something important. She wasn't sure yet what it was. She knew it mattered. She went to check on Min-jae. He was at his table, drawing. This time, in the bottom corner of the page, there was a small figure she hadn't seen in his work before. A boy, sitting next to a tree with correct branches. She didn't say anything about it. She just sat down beside him and picked up her pencil. He slid the tin of colors toward her without being asked. Han Yuan arrived at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the whole house knew it before she walked through the door. Not because anyone announced her. Because the staff moved differently. Shoulders pulled back slightly. Eyes found the floor. Conversations that had been easy a moment before became careful and short. The kitchen, which had a kind of low warm noise to it most mornings, went quiet in the specific way of a room that has decided to pay attention. Nadia was coming down the east corridor with Minji's clean laundry when the front door opened and Han Yuan stepped inside. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, precise, intentional, without a single accidental detail. Her clothes were simple, but the kind of simple that cost money to achieve. Her hair fell perfectly. Her posture said she had never once in her life walked into a room unsure of how she would be received. She smiled at Mrs. Cho. She touched Sejin's arm when he came to meet her in the hall. She laughed at something he said, a warm, easy laugh that landed exactly where it was supposed to. Nadia's grandmother's voice arrived without being called. Real love is clumsy. It laughs at the wrong time. It forgets itself. Watch for people whose kindness never misses its mark. Nadia watched. Yuan turned to Min-jae next. She crouched to his level, graceful, practiced, and produced a small wrapped box from her bag. "I saw this and thought of you," she said warmly, in Korean. Min-jae looked at the box. He looked at Yuan. He took the gift with both hands the way he had been taught, and said thank you in a voice that was polite and completely empty. Nadia noted the emptiness. Children that age were not good at hiding what they felt. They hadn't learned how yet. Which meant Min-jae hadn't learned to feel something from this woman's gifts. He had learned to perform receiving them. Those were different things. Yuan stood, and her eyes found Nadia standing in the corridor. The warmth stayed on her face. It did not reach the next 2 seconds. "You must be the new nanny," she said in smooth English. Her accent was light, international, the kind that came from years of moving between cities that mattered. "Nadia Osei," Nadia said. "Yes, Nadia." Yuan repeated it like she was placing it somewhere she could find it later. "Min-jae seems comfortable with you already." "That's good." A smile. "Easy. Landing exactly where it was meant to. He takes time with people." "He does," Nadia agreed. The conversation was over in 40 seconds. Yuan moved on. Sejin led her toward the sitting room. The house exhaled. Min-jae pressed the unopened gift box against Nadia's laundry pile without a word and walked back toward the playroom. She let him. That afternoon Nadia crossed paths with Yuan again in the east corridor. Just the two of them, the house quiet around them, the kind of accidental meeting that Nadia suspected, afterward, was not entirely accidental. Yuan stopped, tilted her head. The warmth from the morning was still there on the surface, but beneath it something else had come forward. Something cooler and more direct. "You're good with him," she said. "I can see that." "Thank you," Nadia said simply. Yuan held her gaze for a moment. Children are adaptable though. Especially at this age. Her voice was light, conversational, the tone of someone making pleasant small talk. They adjust to whoever is consistently present. Whoever stays. A small pause. "You should think about whether that will be you." She smiled once more. Moved past. Nadia stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of heels on marble growing quieter. She thought about what had just happened. Not the words themselves. The words were deniable, casual, almost kind on the surface. She thought about the space underneath them. The thing being communicated in the gap between what was said and what was meant. You are temporary. I am not. The boy will learn the difference. Nadia turned and walked back toward the playroom. Min-jae was at his table. The gift box from earlier sat untouched on the shelf behind him. He was drawing a house, a tree, a woman with big hair sitting on a bench. She sat down across from him. Is that the park? She asked. He nodded without looking up. The bench looks comfortable, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. That small thing. The space just before a smile. She picked up a pencil and started drawing beside him, and neither of them said anything else, and the untouched gift box sat on the shelf behind them both, and the corridor outside was quiet again, and for now, just for now, that was enough. It started small. That was the thing about it. It started so small that if Nadia hadn't been paying the kind of attention she paid to everything, she might have missed the beginning entirely. A Tuesday, 3 weeks into her placement. She had Minji's afternoon schedule set, park at 2, reading at 4, dinner at 6. Simple, consistent, the kind of routine that gave a quiet child something solid to stand on. She had cleared it with Mrs. Cho at the start of the week the way she always did. At 1:30, Mrs. Cho came to the playroom door with an apologetic look that wasn't entirely genuine. The afternoon car wouldn't be available until 3:30. Something about a schedule change. Very sorry. Min-jae looked up from his drawing. Nadia looked at Mrs. Cho. That's fine, she said. We'll adjust. She adjusted. She didn't make it a problem. But she noted the apologetic look that didn't reach the eyes, and she noted that the car had been available every Tuesday for 3 weeks without issue, and she noted the particular timing of it, 1:30, not enough time to arrange alternative transport, just enough disruption to unsettle the afternoon. She wrote it down that evening in the small notebook she kept in her bag. Date. Time. What happened. What was said. Her grandmother had taught her that. When something feels wrong but you can't prove it yet, write it down. The proof catches up eventually. The following week, it was the park itself. A message passed through Mrs. Cho. Madame Yuan had mentioned to Mr. Kwan that perhaps the park visits were becoming too routine, that Min-jae might benefit from more structured indoor activity. Mr. Kwan had not exactly agreed, but he had not disagreed either, and so perhaps Nadia could consider varying the schedule. Nadia considered it. Then she took Min-jae to the park on Sunday as usual and said nothing to anyone about it. The week after that, a staff member she hadn't spoken to before appeared in the corridor outside the playroom twice in one afternoon. Not doing anything. Just present. Just near enough to notice. The staff treated her differently now. Not rudely, nobody was rude, nobody gave her anything she could point to, but the easy small talk from her first 2 weeks was gone. People were careful around her. Measured. The kitchen felt different when she walked in. Conversations finished before she arrived. She was being made to feel like the edges of her position were smaller than she had thought. She documented everything. Dates, times, exact words where she had them. She kept the notebook in the inside pocket of her bag, and she kept her bag with her. The cruelest part, and she recognized it as cruel precisely because it was so well designed, was what was being said to Min-jae. She didn't hear it directly at first. She felt it in the boy. He came back from an afternoon with Yuan one Wednesday quieter than usual. Not the comfortable quiet she had learned to recognize as simply his nature. A different kind, pressed down, like something had been placed on top of him. At bedtime he was slow to settle. She sat beside him in the low lamplight and read without pushing for conversation. Eventually, in the dark, he said, "Do nannies always leave?" She closed the book slowly. "Where did you hear that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Someone said children get used to whoever is there. But then sometimes they're not there anymore." Her jaw tightened. She kept her voice soft. "I'm here right now," she said. "And right now is what matters most." He thought about that. Then he turned onto his side and closed his eyes. She sat beside him until his breathing slowed and steadied into sleep. Then she sat for a few minutes longer in the quiet room, the lamplight small and warm, the rest of the house doing whatever it did in the dark. When she finally stood, she noticed that Sunhee's door at the end of the corridor was open. A thin line of light underneath it. It had been closed yesterday. Nadia looked at the light for a long moment. Then she looked back at the sleeping boy. She went to her room, opened her notebook, wrote down what Min-jae had said, word for word, the way her grandmother taught her. The proof catches up eventually. She was going to make sure it did. Sejin's office was on the second floor, corner room, glass on two sides. The kind of office that let the person behind the desk see everything while revealing very little about themselves. Nadia had noticed it the first week. She noticed it again now, sitting across from him in the same chair as her interview, the morning light coming in flat and even behind him. He had asked her to come at 9. She was there at 8:55. He didn't open with small talk. She had learned that about him. He didn't use words to fill space, only to move things forward. In another context, she might have respected it more than she currently did. There have been some concerns raised, he said. About boundaries. What kind of concerns, Nadia said. Not a question exactly. More like a door she was holding open for him to walk through clearly. He was measured about it. She gave him that. He didn't perform anger or disappointment. He laid it out the way a man lays out a business problem, calmly, with the assumption that calm made it more reasonable. Nadia had inserted herself into family conversations that weren't her place. She had made observations about household members that went beyond her role. She had, on at least one occasion, questioned a decision that had come from above her position. He said all of it without raising his voice, without being unkind. Every word had Yuan's fingerprints on it. Nadia sat straight in her chair and listened to the full shape of it before she said anything. Her grandmother's rule, let someone finish building the room before you decide whether to walk out of it. When he was done, she said, "Can I ask who raised these concerns?" A brief pause. That's not relevant to the conversation. She nodded once. I understand my role here. I take care of Min-jae. His schedule, his development, his safety and well-being. Those are my responsibilities. She kept her voice even. If I've crossed a line that wasn't clear to me, I'd like to know specifically where, so I don't do it again. Sejin looked at her. She looked back. Maintain professional distance from household dynamics that don't involve Min-jae directly, he said. That's the boundary. Understood, she said. He nodded. The meeting was over. She stood, thanked him for his time the way you thank someone when you are being precise and not warm, and walked out of the glass office and down the corridor and up the stairs to the east wing and into her room at the end of the hall. She sat on the edge of her bed. The room was small and clean and quiet. A single window faced the garden. She had put one photograph on the desk, her grandmother, sitting on the front steps of the house in Atlanta, laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, completely unguarded. Nadia looked at it for a while. She didn't call anyone. There was no one to call who could fix this particular thing. Her mother was gone. Her grandmother was gone. Her friends back home were living their own complicated lives and would listen and love her and be completely unable to reach into a Mafia estate in Seoul and straighten anything out. She sat with it instead. The quiet. The smallness of the room against the size of the problem. She was being managed. She understood that. Yuan had gone to Sejin with something shaped carefully enough to sound like reasonable concern, and Sejin, a man who trusted the information given to him by the people in his closest circle, had received it as truth. He wasn't cruel. He was uninformed. Those were different problems with different solutions, and right now she didn't have access to either one. She thought about leaving. She let herself think it fully, without pushing it away, because her grandmother had taught her that ignored thoughts got louder. She thought about packing her carry-on, calling the agency, writing a professional and neutral exit letter. Then she thought about Min-jae asking in the dark whether Nanny's always left. She thought about the drawing, the small figure in the corner, the boy who had finally put himself in the picture. She stood up, picked up her bag, walked down the corridor to the playroom. Min-jae's light was on. He was sitting up in bed with a book open in his lap, not reading it, just holding it. waiting in the particular way of children who know how to wait because they've had too much practice. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame. Couldn't sleep either? He shook his head. She came in, sat in the chair beside his bed, picked up the book from his nightstand, The Bear Who Finds His Way Home by Following Honey, and opened it to the first page. She read until his breathing slowed. She stayed until she was sure. Then she went back to her room, opened her notebook, and wrote down every word from the meeting. Exact. Precise. Dated. The proof catches up eventually. She was still here. That meant something. Sundays became the truest part of the week. Everything else in the estate had a performance to it. Meals that were formal, hallways that required a certain posture, rooms that expected you to remember what you were and where you stood. But Sunday mornings, when Nadia walked Min-jae through the iron gates and toward the park 3 blocks east, the performance fell away like a coat left at the door. Min-jae ran. That was the first thing he always did. Not toward anything in particular, just forward, just fast, the way children run when running itself is the point. His school shoes hit the path and his arms pumped and his face went from careful and contained to something open and uncomplicated, and Nadia would find a bench and sit and watch him and feel something in her chest loosen that she hadn't realized was tight. She let him run until he couldn't. It always ended the same way. He would slow, then stop, then drop into the grass on his back with his chest heaving and his face red, looking up at the sky with the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished something important. She would walk over and sit beside him in the grass, and they would stay like that for a while without talking, which was its own kind of conversation. The tongue twister lessons had started by accident. Nadia had been trying to pronounce a Korean word badly enough that Min-jae had looked at her with genuine concern, and she had laughed, and he had tried to correct her, and the correction had made her worse, and somewhere in the back and forth of it he had laughed too. Real and sudden, the same surprised laugh from the first Sunday, the one that caught him off guard. She started mispronouncing things on purpose after that. Not obviously. Just enough. He always caught it. He was sharp that way. He would give her a look, patient, a little long-suffering, very much his father's expression on a 6-year-old face, and then he would say it correctly, slowly, and make her repeat it until she got it right. In return, she taught him English tongue twisters, the harder ones, and listened to him work through them with the same focused determination he gave his drawings. She was teaching him that struggle could be funny. That getting something wrong in front of another person was not a dangerous thing. She wasn't sure he knew that yet. She was fairly sure nobody had shown him. On the 3rd Sunday of the month, he arrived at her door before she knocked on his, which was new. He had his jacket already on, one button done up wrong, his tin of colored pencils tucked under his arm. She fixed the button without commenting on it. He let her. At the park he drew for an hour while she read beside him. When he finished, he held the paper out to her with both hands, the way he had been taught to offer things, formal and careful. She took it. 3 figures. A bench in the middle of a park. On the bench, a small boy and a woman with large, full hair drawn in careful circular strokes. Standing beside the bench, slightly apart, a small older woman with round glasses and her hands folded in front of her. Nobody else. Just the 3 of them in the park on a sunny day that had the simple crayon sun in the corner. Nadia looked at it for a long time. "This is us," she said. He nodded, eyes on his pencil tin. "And grandmother Sunhee." Another nod. She folded it carefully and put it in her bag. She told him it was the best drawing she had ever been given, and she meant it without decoration, and he looked at the ground and pressed his lips together against the smile that came anyway. That evening she found a small frame in the market near the estate and put the drawing in it and set it on her desk beside her grandmother's photograph. She went for tea with Sunhee before dinner. They sat in the warm light of the west wing, cups between their hands, the garden visible through the low window. Sunhee looked at the drawing Nadia had brought to show her. She held it for a long moment. "He hasn't given anyone a drawing in 2 years," she said quietly. Nadia received that information and sat with it. 2 years. Since before the quiet. Since before the careful silences and the flinching and the boy who left himself out of every picture. Something had taken that from him. And something Sundays, mostly, and pencils and wrong pronunciations and a bench in the grass had begun, slowly, to give it back. That night Nadia stood in the bathroom with the tap running and cried quietly for about 4 minutes. Not from sadness exactly. From the particular feeling of understanding, all at once, how much had been missing and how long it had been gone. Then she washed her face. Turned off the tap. Went to check that Minji's light was off. It was. He was already asleep. One hand open on the pillow beside his face, completely unguarded, the way children sleep when they feel safe. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went to bed. The gifts got bigger. That was the first sign that something had shifted in Yuan's strategy. Where before there had been small wrapped boxes delivered with choreographed warmth, now there were outings, a children's museum on a Wednesday, a toy store on a Friday afternoon. A cake from the most expensive bakery in Gangnam presented at the dinner table on a Tuesday with candles, even though Minji's birthday was 4 months away. Sejin watched these gestures the way he watched most things, with quiet approval, reading them as evidence of genuine feeling. Nadia watched them differently. The frequency was wrong. Real affection built slowly, at the pace of the child. What Yuan was doing moved at the pace of a deadline. She was accelerating. Something had made her accelerate. Nadia thought about that. She thought about the drawing on her desk, and the Sunday park visits, and the tongue twister lessons, and the way Min-jae had started arriving at her door with his jacket already on. She thought about what it would look like to someone watching from the outside, a child attaching, quickly and visibly, to a woman who was not supposed to be permanent. Yuan had seen the drawing. Or she had heard about it. Either way, she knew. And so the gifts became outings, and the outings became presents, and the presence was being built into a shape that looked, from a certain angle, like family. Nadia watched Min-jae during these performances. His face during the museum trip, reported to her by the security detail who said little, but whose expressions sometimes said more, careful, polite, the face he wore at formal mealtimes. His face when he came home, quiet in the pressed-down way, heavier than when he left. He never talked about the outings. Not once. She didn't push. Then on a Thursday afternoon, she came down the west corridor to collect Min-jae from the sitting room and heard Yuan's voice through the half-open door. Low and warm and very deliberate. She stopped. Grandmothers get tired, Yuan was saying in Korean, her voice gentle and reasonable, the tone of an adult explaining something difficult with great kindness. It's natural. As people get older, they can't always be there the way they used to. It's nobody's fault. A pause. Minji's silence. Change is just part of life, Yuan continued. The people we love don't always stay the same. Sometimes things have to be different. That's not a bad thing. It just means we have to be ready. Nadia stood in the corridor with her hand flat against the wall. She knew exactly what was being built inside that room. She had seen it done before, not in estates with marble floors, but in ordinary houses, by ordinary people who wanted something that belonged to someone else. You didn't take a child's attachments directly. You loosened them first. You taught the child, in a gentle and reasonable voice, that the people they loved were unreliable, temporary, subject to change. Then you positioned yourself as the one constant. The one who stayed. It was patient, and it was calculated, and it was one of the crueler things a person could do to a 6-year-old boy who had already learned, too early, to hold people loosely. Nadia pushed the door open. Yuan looked up. The warmth came forward immediately, practiced, instant, not a beat missed. Nadia. We were just talking. A light smile. Come in. It's time for Minji's reading hour, Nadia said. Her voice was level. She looked at the boy. Min-jae slid off the sofa and crossed the room to her side without hesitation. Yuan watched him do it. Something moved behind her eyes, quick and cold, and then the smile returned and she said, of course. We'll continue later, Minjia. Nadia took him to the playroom. She sat him at his table with his pencils and his paper, and she pulled her chair close and stayed within arm's reach. He drew without speaking. She read without speaking. After 20 minutes he said, Without looking up, "Is grandmother Sahi tired?" Nadia put her book down. "What do you think?" He considered it seriously, the way he considered most things. "She always has tea ready," he said. "Tired people don't always do that." "That's a very smart observation," Nadia said. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his drawing. That evening Nadia went to Sunhee's room. She knocked. Was told to enter. Sunhee was in her chair, lamp on, book open, completely unsurprised to see her. Nadia sat down without being invited and told her what she had heard, word for word. Sahi listened without interruption. When Nadia finished, the old woman closed her book with the careful precision of someone who has decided something. She was already awake, Nadia realized. She had already known. The lamplight sat warm and steady between them. Outside, the estate was quiet. Neither of them trusted the quiet anymore. It started with a drawing. Min-jae had been working on it for 3 days. Nadia knew because she had watched it grow, first the outline, then the careful details added each evening after dinner, the colored pencils chosen and returned to the tin with a seriousness that meant this particular picture mattered more than the others. On Friday morning he finished it. He carried it to her door with both hands, flat and level, the way you carry something that must not bend. She took it with both hands the same way. It was the park bench again. The woman with the big hair. But this time there was more, a proper sky with real clouds, not just a corner sun. Grass with individual blades. A tree on the left side with branches that were botanically correct because Min-jae had standards. And on the woman's lap, open, a book. And beside the woman, pressed close, the small boy. Not near her. Beside her. The difference in the drawing was the distance, which was none. Nadia looked at it for a long moment. "This is for you," he said. "To keep." She told him she would keep it forever. He looked at his socks and nodded as though this was the expected and acceptable response. She put it carefully in her bag to frame later and told him to get his jacket. He had it on before she finished the sentence, one button wrong again, which she had come to understand was not carelessness, but simply the tax paid by a child moving too fast toward something he wanted. She fixed the button. He was already moving toward the stairs. She was 3 steps behind him. Later she would think about those 3 steps. Whether if she had been 2 steps behind instead of 3, she would have been close enough. Whether it would have made any difference. She would think about it, and then stop thinking about it, because the answer was yes, and sitting with yes for too long helped nobody. Min-jae reached the top of the staircase at a run. Yuan was at the bottom, coming up. She had appeared from the east corridor, which she did sometimes unannounced, moving through the house with the ease of someone who considered it already hers. Min-jae didn't see her in time. His foot caught the edge of the top step. The fall happened fast the way falls always do. A sudden loss of balance, arms out, the small body pitching forward. Nadia lunged. Her hand caught the back of his jacket, not enough to stop it, enough to slow it, and she pulled him into her as they hit the 3rd step together, her arm around him, her body taking the angle of the stairs. They landed on the 4th step in a heap. Her elbow hit the banister. His knee hit the edge. He started crying immediately, the shocked, overwhelmed cry of a child who is not badly hurt but has been badly frightened. She pulled him fully into her arms and held him. Checked his hands, his knees, the back of his head, fast and practiced. Scraped knee. Nothing else. She held him tighter. Then she looked up. Yuan was standing at the bottom of the staircase. She had not moved. Not one step up. Not one hand extended, not one instinctive lean forward. She was standing exactly where she had been when the fall began, her expression untroubled, her posture undisturbed. She was watching Nadia hold the crying child with the calm attention of someone watching something that did not involve them. No alarm, no relief, no trace of the maternal warmth she performed so consistently for Sejin's benefit. Just calculation. Just a woman who had seen a child fall and decided in real time that the outcome did not require her participation. Nadia held Min-jae for another moment. She felt his breathing begin to slow against her shoulder. She felt his hands relax their grip on her sleeve. She set him down gently on the step beside her. She looked at him, At his face, at the scraped knee, at the way he was already steadying himself, because he was a child who had learned to steady himself quickly. "Sit right here," she said quietly. "Don't move." He nodded. She stood up. She turned. She looked at Yuan at the bottom of the stairs, the perfect hair, the undisturbed posture, the eyes that had already begun calculating how the next 60 seconds would need to be managed. Something in Nadia's chest closed like a hand making a fist. Not anger exactly. Something older and more certain than anger. The same thing that had made her sit on the floor with a picture book and wait for a hidden boy to come out from behind a curtain. The same thing that made her fix a button wrong every morning without saying a word about it. The same thing that had kept her in this house through schedule interference and staff silences and a glass-walled office and a warning delivered calmly by a man who trusted the wrong information. 3 months of watching a child be used as a prop. She walked down the stairs. 3 steps. Her right hand came forward, open palm, not a fist, a correction. The same way her grandmother had once stepped between a market vendor and an elderly woman he had pushed, not with rage, with certainty. The hit connected. Clean. Final. Yuan went sideways off the step and down, one heel snapping as she hit the marble floor, hair spreading out around her, hand flying to her cheek. Nadia stood between the staircase and the woman on the floor. Her palm stung. Her career was likely over. Her visa was probably flagged before the sound finished echoing in the marble foyer. She didn't move. From the top of the stairs, Min-jae looked down at her with wide, wet eyes. From the doorway, Kwon Si-jin's voice arrived. Low. Contained. Final. Step away from her. The room went absolutely still. And Han Yuan, on the marble floor, hand to her cheek, still calculating, realized, with a cold and sinking precision, that the sentence had not traveled in the direction she needed it to go. Yuan moved fast. Nadia had expected that. Within the hour a lawyer was on the phone. Within 2 hours there was talk of formal charges, assault in a private residence, unprovoked, a guest of the household attacked by a domestic employee. The language was already shaped, already clean, already designed to fit inside a system that understood those categories and knew what to do with them. By evening, Nadia's visa status had been flagged. She sat in her small room and listened to the house move around her, footsteps in the corridor, low voices behind closed doors, the particular tension of a building holding its breath. She had her notebook open on her desk, but she wasn't writing. She was thinking. She had known this was possible. She had known since the East Corridor, since the first cold exchange, since the schedule interference and the staff silences and the glass-walled office. She had known that if she ever became a direct problem for Yuan rather than a manageable inconvenience, the response would be fast and well-resourced. She looked at the photograph of her grandmother on the desk, laughing at something off camera, head thrown back, completely unguarded. She opened her notebook and wrote down everything from the staircase. Exact. Precise. Dated. What she saw, what she did, what was said, in what order. Her grandmother's rule, followed to the end. Then she waited. Mrs. Cho knocked at 9. Mr. Kwon wanted to see her in the morning. She was to remain in her room until then. She said yes. She closed the door. She sat back down. Minji's light was on down the hall. She could see the thin line of it under his door from where she sat. She watched it for a while. Then she turned off her own lamp and lay in the dark and did not sleep for a very long time. She did not know about the cameras. She did not know that 3 months earlier, during a routine security upgrade, Kwon Si-jin had installed a private system throughout the estate, every common room, every corridor, every staircase, backed up to a server that only his head of security accessed. Installed not because he suspected anyone in particular, but because he was a man whose entire life had taught him that the rooms closest to you were the rooms you needed to watch most carefully. He had not watched them closely enough. He knew that now. He sat alone in his office at 11 that night with the footage from the staircase playing on his screen. He watched it once. Then he made a phone call to his head of security that lasted 4 minutes. Then he watched it again. At the same time, in the West Wing, Kwon-sun he was doing something she had been doing quietly for 6 weeks. She was not a woman who trusted fast. She had lived too long inside a world where trust was currency and currency got stolen. But she had watched Nadia Ose arrive in this house and sit on the floor with a picture book and wait, and she had made a private decision in the first 2 weeks that this particular woman was worth the investment. She had started keeping her phone close after the hidden conversation Nadia had reported to her, the one in the sitting room, the reasonable and gentle voice teaching a 6-year-old boy to hold people loosely. He had heard variations of that voice before. She knew what it was building toward. She had 7 weeks of recordings. Not dramatic confrontations. Nothing loud or obvious. Small moments. Yuan in the corridor. Yuan at the dinner table. Yuan in the west sitting room with Min Jae. The careful and patient construction of a version of this household where certain people were permanent and certain people were not. The tone always warm. The content always cold. She brought the phone to Sejin's office at 11:30. He looked at it for a long moment before he took it. He listened for 2 hours. In the morning, before the meeting with Nadia, his head of intelligence placed a second report on his desk. It had taken most of the night to assemble. Yuan's communications, flagged initially by a routine security scan 2 weeks ago, set aside, now pulled forward and examined fully in the context of everything else. Minji's school address. His weekly schedule. His medical records. His nanny's daily patterns. What time Nadia left the estate, what route she took to the park, how long they stayed, which gate they used coming back. All of it forwarded. Regularly, carefully, to a number registered outside Korea, traced within the hour to a communication channel used by a rival faction that had been trying to find reliable access to the Kwan organization for 3 years. Yuan had never been here for Sejin. She had been here for access. Patient, long-term, deeply embedded access. And the door she had been opening, slowly and carefully, for 3 months, was 6 years old and had his father's eyes, and had only just learned to put himself back into his own drawings. Sejin sat with this for a long time. Then he called his head of security. Then his lawyer. Then a second lawyer. He did not call Yuan. When Nadia came to his office at 9, he was already standing, which she noticed the way she noticed everything. He looked like a man who had not slept, which he hadn't, and like a man who had read something that rearranged the furniture of everything he thought he understood, which he had. He said, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me about the cameras first." He told her. All of it. The footage, his mother's recordings, the intelligence report, the rival faction, the forwarded files, the boys' schedules sent outside the country like information, like a resource, like a door being measured for a key. The room was very quiet when he finished. Nadia looked at the desk between them. Then she looked up. "He drew himself back into the picture," she said. 3 months ago, he was leaving himself out of every drawing. Last week, he put himself right next to the person he felt safest with. She paused. She knew that. She saw what was being built, and she tried to take it apart before it became something she couldn't use. Sejin said nothing. "Your son was the door," Nadia said. And nobody was watching the door. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room. Outside in the corridor, somewhere in the east wing, a small boy was awake and drawing, and the proof had finally caught up, and the machinery that had been pointed at the wrong person was turning, slowly and entirely, around. Yuan left the estate on a Thursday morning. She did not leave quietly. That would have required a different kind of person, but she left completely, which was what mattered. 2 men from Sejin's security team stood in the east corridor while she collected her things. She said very little. Her lawyer had already told her how much the cameras had captured, and Yuan was smart enough to understand when a position had become indefensible. The heels clicked across the marble foyer one final time. The door closed. The house exhaled. Nadia's visa flag was cleared the same afternoon. The assault charges were dissolved before they were formally filed. The staircase footage made the sequence of events plain enough that no lawyer wanted to stand in front of it and argue otherwise. The agency that had placed her received a formal communication from the Kwan estate confirming her continued employment. She sat in her small room and read the confirmation twice. Then she put it in her notebook, behind all the dated entries, at the back where things went that didn't need to be looked at again. She didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate exactly. A child had been used as a strategic asset by a woman sleeping in his father's house. A 6-year-old boy had been slowly taught, in a gentle and reasonable voice, to hold the people he loved loosely so that losing them would feel familiar when it came. That wasn't a victory. That was just the stopping of something that should never have started. Min-jae didn't fully understand what had happened. She was glad for that. He knew Yuan was gone. He knew the house felt different. He processed it the way children process large things, not all at once, but in small pieces over time, through behavior rather than words. The first Sunday after, he arrived at her door earlier than usual. Jacket on. Both buttons correct, which was new and which she understood without being told as a form of ceremony. He had his pencil tin under one arm, and he looked at her with his father's eyes and said, "Park." "Park," she said. They went. He ran until his face was red. She sat on the bench and watched him and let the knot in her chest loosen in the thin autumn sunshine. When he dropped into the grass, she walked over and sat beside him, and they stayed like that without talking, which was still its own kind of conversation. Sejin came to Minji's room that night and sat on the floor beside the bed. Nadia saw it from the corridor, the door open, the lamp low, the large man folded down to the floor of his son's room the way men fold themselves when they are trying to become less large, less formal, less everything they have built themselves into being. He stayed until Min-jae slept. She didn't say anything about it. Some things were not hers to comment on. They were just hers to witness. Son, he told her over morning tea 3 days later. They were in the west wing, the garden pale and cool through the low window, both of them with cups between their hands in the quiet that had become its own language between them. He sat with him for 2 hours, Sahi said. She looked at her cup. He hasn't done that since the boy was an infant. Nadia said nothing. We had people in this house who feared my son, Sunhee continued. Her voice was measured and careful, the voice of a woman choosing each word the way Min-jae chose each pencil. And people who wanted something from him. That has been true for a long time. She paused. You were the first person in 3 years who simply loved the child. Without wanting anything back. Without a position to protect. She looked up. We didn't know that was missing until you showed us what it looked like. Nadia held the teacup in both hands and felt the warmth of it. I knew what was missing, she said quietly. I saw it in his drawings the first week. A boy who kept leaving himself out of the picture. Sahi nodded once. The conversation was complete. Nadia accepted Sejin's formal offer of a permanent position that Friday. Full-time. Proper salary. Visa sponsorship. She accepted on 2 conditions delivered without apology. She answered to Minji's needs before any other consideration in the house, and she answered to Sunhee's judgment before any other adult in it. Sejin agreed to both without negotiating, which told her something about how much the last week had rearranged him. On the Tuesday evening of the following week, Nadia was in the kitchen making tea when Sejin came in and sat at the counter in the way of a man who is not entirely sure he is allowed to be there, but has decided to try. She let him sit. She made 2 cups without being asked. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I read his reports from last year. Before you came. His teacher wrote that he was withdrawn. That he didn't participate. That he seemed disconnected from the other children. I know, she said. His report from last month says he taught the whole class a Korean tongue twister. A pause. Apparently, he made them repeat it until they got it right. Nadia pressed her lips together against the smile. He has standards, she said. Sejin looked at his teacup. The silence between them was different from the silences of before, less like distance, more like the pause before something is said that takes a moment to find its shape. I'm trying to learn how to see what's in front of me, he said finally. The words came out careful and unadorned, the way honest things did from a man unaccustomed to saying them. I'd like to start here, if you'll allow it. Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Then she refilled his tea. You have a lot of catching up to do, she said. From the east corridor, small feet were moving toward the kitchen. Min-jae appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, pencil tin in hand, hair flattened on one side from the pillow. He looked at his father sitting at the counter. He looked at Nadia. He climbed onto the stool beside Sijin without a word, opened his tin, and set a piece of paper on the counter. He began to draw. After a moment, Sijin reached over and picked up a pencil. He drew a line. Uncertain, slightly crooked. Min-jae looked at it with the long-suffering patience of a child with standards. Then he reached over and corrected it without comment, the way Nadia had let him correct her from the very beginning. Sijin looked at the correction, then at his son. Something moved across his face, quiet and unguarded, the specific expression of a man understanding, all at once, what he had been missing and how simple it was and how long he had made it complicated. Nadia picked up her tea, looked out the kitchen window at the dark garden. On the counter behind her, a man and his son drew together for the first time, and the lines were imperfect, and nobody minded, and the house was warm, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.